So Mexica Movement, what we're working on is basically to re-educate ourselves and re-educate the world basically on this hidden history, this destroyed history. And we're an indigenous rights organization, but not just within the borders of Mexico, not the Mexico of today or the Mexico of 200 years ago, which encompassed this part of the land. It refers more to what was here before 1492, where this was all indigenous land, and the destruction that happened to us started actually with what was done with the people in the Canary Islands. There are no more Canary Islanders today. The Canary Islands were invaded by the Spaniards, and they found out that smallpox had an interesting effect on the people, and it basically wiped them out. So by the early 1500s, there were no Canary Islanders. Same thing happened with our people. Once Columbus found out that the smallpox also worked there, they used it in the Caribbean, and it was used in what's called Mexico and Central America. It was used in South America, and the Europeans actually continued the use of the smallpox because it was used on Hawaii. It was used in the whole Polynesian area because, again, there was no immunity for smallpox. And the same thing happened in Australia, happened in New Zealand, and even in South Africa. So you have to be aware of this. The books kind of make slight reference to it, but in 100% of all the places that non-white people had no immunity to it, there was either 100% extinction or 95% or 90 to 95% of the people were killed in those areas. So when we talk of Cemanahuac, means the whole Western Hemisphere, we're talking about what was here before 1492, the civilizations that were here. There's enough basically to reconstruct the civilizations. There's enough to reconstruct the philosophies, the poetry, the art. There's plenty to do it with. Even though the majority of our libraries were burnt, yes, we had libraries, we had cities, we had universities, we have all these things that nobody wants to make public, to be known. They don't want the fact that Europeans basically were successful not because of guns and horses, but because of the immoral, unethical use of smallpox as a weapon of mass destruction. But there were benefits to using it. Basically, you got a lot of free land. You got what was left of our population would be used as slaves to work in the fields, to be working in the mines. So when we're talking about Mexica Movement, so it's not just about the Mexica. It's equivalent to, say, Italy. Most of us know about Italy. I know more about, or my people in general know more about being Jewish people. They know about being Italians. They know about being English. We know about everybody else's history except our own. So I do know a lot about Italy. I know that prior to the middle 1800s, they were not united as one country. There were city-states, principalities, all these different divisions. They didn't even come to an agreement as to, what their national language was going to be up until about the 1500s. But it wasn't really until about the middle 1800s that they came together as one nation. And what they decided to base their nation was on the last great civilization, which was the Roman. And that's everything that they basically reconstructed themselves on. And the same thing happened with Greece when they reconstructed themselves. And it's a pattern that people do when they're, they've been destroyed as a people, and they figure out, well, what can we do to reconstruct our nation, to reconstruct our pride? And that's what we're doing with Mexica Movement. We want our people to know who they are, because right now they don't know who they are. Whether it's in this part of our land, or in the LA part of our land, or the Mexico City part of our land, or the Argentina part of our land, in any of our lands, we're very confused about who we are. We're by the European borders that have been laid out on our land. We're confused by the languages, the tribal people here who speak English. Oh, those other people that look like us, they're not us, because they speak Spanish. And the issues of identity get even more confused when it comes down to the product of rape that's been going on for 5 centuries. We're having a conversation earlier with a couple African descent people who are in the audience with us today, and we talked about the parallels. For the African descent people, they were slaves, and guess what? We were slaves also. That's why there are so many Garcias and Fernandez and Gonzalez and blah, blah. They weren't the product of marriages. These were the products of whose slaves you were. But it wasn't so much plantations. It was the mines of so-and-so or the haciendas of so-and-so. It was more in that kind of a situation. And then, of course, when, again, the men are at the mines, the women are there, and hey, that's suddenly you have white blood in the population. And again, that's nothing unique either, but we handle it in the worst of all ways that it can be handled. The French are mixed from again, from the original people of France, and then the Germanic tribes went in there, and then the Romans went in there, and then say, oh, what are we? Oh, we're so confused. No, they're French. Same thing with the Italians. The northern Italians are basically Germans. The southern Italians are basically Greeks. But they don't say, oh, how can I deny my Greek blood? How can I deny my German blood? No, they say, we're Italians, basing it on the Romans. They don't seem to have all this anguish, all of this, I can't possibly deny my German blood. I can't Or the Turks. Take a look at the Turks. Or take a look at the Jews. How much more mix is there of people on this in the history of humanity? They don't say, well, you know, I can't deny my German blood. You know, it's there. I got to study German. I got to make sure I speak German right. It's not even, it doesn't ever come up that way. But you ask a Mexican or a Central American, and what are you? Well, I'm Hispanic. Doesn't that refer to the people of Spain? Well, yeah, it does, but it also refers to, well, see, I have some Spanish blood. Oh, gee, I saw you. You didn't look like you were white. Well, no, I'm not white, but it says I have Spanish blood. I can't deny my Spanish blood. So this is part of the confusion. You ask another one, and then what are you? He said, well, my grandfather came from Spain. That's the big lie in our community. They invent the grandfather that came from Spain. If every person who says that was actually true, there would be no males left in Spain today. But it is part of the lie. But who taught us to make up these lies? There's something that began in 1492, and that was white supremacy. White supremacy says Columbus, and for those of you who don't believe what I'm telling you, read the actual words of Columbus from his journal. And you get to find out such Christian things like, these people, referring to our people in the Caribbean, and he says, these people are so giving. They're wonderful the way they treat each other. You ask them for something and they give it to you. And you would think he would follow, man, this is the way Christians are supposed to be. We should emulate them. We should figure out how we can learn from them. But that's not what the man said, because he wasn't really a Christian. And the majority of the people who claim that they're Christians are not really Christians, because what he really said, and what most Christians have said, these people are going to make excellent slaves. And they quickly started enslaving us, and within a generation, the people that had been on that island were extinct. From smallpox, slavery, you name it. Because they looked at us as beasts. Beasts don't have rights to land. Beasts don't have rights to their dignity or their identity. or to their humanity. So that was a pattern that actually began in the Canary Islands, and they brought it. It was a little beginnings to something that is going on worldwide. Except we don't call it colonialism today. We call it, what do we call it? Globalization. And what was going on with us at the beginning is, yeah, in the Caribbean, they did find our people living on these islands in a paradise, which was the inspiration for everybody like Thomas More and other people who said, wow, this sounds ideal. These are very, very Christ-like people. These are, this sounds like a place to be. But again, well, these are savages. They have no cities. They don't have steel. They don't even have weapons. Therefore, these are not real human beings. It took the Pope into the middle 1500s to declare us as human beings. And that's kind of a sad statement, especially 100 years prior to that. There had been another Pope that basically said, you can go into the lands of people who are not Christian, and you can take their lands, you can make them slaves, you may kill them, you can do whatever you want to these people so long as they are not Christians. And that basically is the foundation of white supremacy, since that was directed to Europeans. And that's been, again, the combination of that one Pope saying, hey, you know, if they're not Christians, you can do whatever you want. And so in the Caribbean, there were no cities. There were some small villages of a few thousand. But when they got into Mexico, there were cities. There were 3 cities larger than anything in Europe. And the first thing that they encountered were really the cities of the Mayans. And this gets into kind of, well, what happened to the Mayans? The Mayans were still around when the Europeans came. We can call that lie number 43.